Welcome to the last episode of the 2020-21 lecture series. I hope you are safe and well wherever you are in the world, because today we have an amazing guest that will be introduced by Julia in a minute. Julia and I will be your moderators today. And today's event, it's a bit exceptional, not only because our guest is connecting from the other side of the globe and probably has to wake up in a crazy time for us, but also because the event is jointly hosted by A131 and Reset from the University of Strathclyde and Glasgow School of Art, Suas from the University of Sheffield, and Usas from the University of Edinburgh. First, I would like to briefly introduce you again to this year's theme. As you may probably know, and you took part to it hopefully, last year's series Crisis Action, What is the Emergency? Aimed to start a debate on the role that the built environment plays in responding to the social, economic, and political crisis that our society is currently facing. This year's theme, Death and Life of Architecture, is instead focusing on the reinterpretation of these challenges, creating a parallelism between the stages of life and architecture. It is not only about analyzing the challenges, but it's also about questioning the way we interpret and tackle them. In what way? To explain that, we have a little anecdote. In an Aboriginal school in Western Australia, there was a painting on the floor symbolizing knowledge, with a child walking and talking along with his grandpa. So to us, it was pretty clear. It is the grandpa passing on knowledge of what he experienced in life to the immature child. But that was actually a very Western way to see it, and for the Wajak Aboriginal community, it was the opposite. The innocence of the child was the symbol of knowledge because the child was teaching and questioning what his grandpa always took for granted and right, as a postulate of society. So our lecture series is trying to do the same, reversing the cycle of life, going from retirement to birth and then death, to question what we usually take for granted and the way we tackle these challenges we are nowadays facing. 7 episodes: retirement, adulthood, young adult, teenage, childhood, birth, death and rebirth, with the aim of switching our perspective from the experienced adult to the pristine child. Today we're going to present our last chapter, Death and Rebirth. The previous chapters has seen the presence of architects, photographers, and researchers from different countries and backgrounds, and are now available on YouTube. So I would like to leave you to Julia and our guests with one question in mind. Why do we people act the way we do? Is it the best way to do things or just the one we're used to? Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ado, for your wonderful introduction. So as usual, we have a couple of communications before the lecture begins. First of all, please bear in mind that this lecture is being recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, where you can find all of our past lectures in case you missed them. Secondly, I would like to ask you to remind you to make sure that your microphone is switched off for the duration of the talk. And thirdly, once the talk is over, our speaker Ross is happy to take questions and have a conversation. And we strongly encourage that you ask questions yourself by turning on your microphone, but feel free to drop a line in the chat or in the Padlet link otherwise, and I will gladly read them for you. Lastly, make sure to follow us on our social media at A131 Strat on Facebook or Instagram to keep up to date with all of our future events, competitions, etc. And also remember to follow Reset Architecture, the Sheffield University Architecture Society, and the Edinburgh University Student Architecture Society, which are our partners today. So now that communications are over, I'm really proud to introduce to you Ross Harding. Ross is an optimistic and creative engineer who provides strategic and cost-benefit advice on architectural projects, ranging from houses to citywide master plans. Ross has lived and worked as a consultant in Sydney, Melbourne, London, Stockholm, Mexico, and Berlin. Acknowledging that the barriers to transform cities to become self-sufficient are as much about technology and finance as they are people, Ross started to focus on the creative and cultural aspects of environment, technology, and solutions. Ross is also the founder of Off the Grid Festival, a cultural intervention dedicated to transforming our cities. And currently, Ross and his team are collaborating with 15 architecture firms to help transform Greater Melbourne into the world's first self-sufficient city. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ross Harding. Ross, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Cool. Hey, everybody. I'll share some stuff soon, but I might just, I can start by sharing. Okay. So yeah, calling from Melbourne at like 20 to 6 over here. So good morning or evening, everyone. I would really like to make an effort not to just sort of do a standard kind of lecture. So there's lots of things that I can tell you about, but it's probably more interesting to do it a bit more interactive for me because I'm a little bit bored of sort of saying the same things all the time. But what I will do is I'll say some things and you guys can just sort of jump in as we go and we can kind of, but pretty much what I would like to do is kind of start it off with just a bit of a conversation and then I'll do some talking. So I think particularly what's interesting for me is like the scale of this environmental problem that we have and the kind of approach that we're taking to solve it. And I think that I mean, where I've personally arrived at is the city scale. And I think that like, this is kind of an interesting place to start is just go like, you know, we're still in this mode of trying to get countries to sit around and agree on a carbon target and kind of, and have this sort of like, they're just going to sit around and shake hands and all do it. And from my perspective, it's cities that are going to drive this transition because they're closer to humans and they're actually at the scale of infrastructure that is able to do this. And so I guess in general today, what I'm going to talk to you about is sort of how architecture can help facilitate that. But actually a lot of the conversation has nothing to do with new buildings, but how we can transform our existing cities. So firstly, where are you guys at with like this whole kind of carbon, water and waste thing globally? Like, are you guys all fairly on top of it? Do you guys feel fairly well informed and interested in it, or like fairly innocent to the topic? Have I still got you guys there?
Yeah, bit of a loaded question, but yeah, I think there's always more to learn, I guess. It's kind of hard to be on top of it completely in this day and age, but yeah, definitely something that I think is becoming more and more important for architecture students worldwide, I think.
And we see also universities are tackling this more in how they teach us or what they teach us, but probably not enough. And I don't know, I personally fear the pressure of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think a lot of people are like for years have been talking about the problem, you know, like how bad this thing is. And like, I still feel like there's just not anywhere near enough focus on the solution. And I think like one thing is arriving at the solution. And I like knowing that and finding that and understanding that. But like what we've been exploring as a group is like the complexity of not like why to do something or what to do, but how to do it is where it's really interesting. And so what I'll quickly do is I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then I think that basically we've got a website with all the information on it. There's a whole bunch of videos. There's so much content that we're making that if you guys are interested, you can kind of like read up on. I feel like sort of sharing information is probably not as exciting as just telling you like how things came to be. And basically my background is engineering and finance. So I grew up in Adelaide in Australia. I studied mechanical engineering and finance, and then I moved to, I wanted to learn about the environment. I wanted to work in a field that was like, I'd spend my 40 hours a week doing something with purpose rather than just trying to make money to survive. And I just kind of, for some reason, I was into maths and art, and I kind of thought I should probably get into renewable energy for some reason. I didn't fully know what that meant. And I got into green buildings, but I studied in Stockholm for a year. And I basically, Stockholm was an incredible experience and it taught me a lot. And I kind of came back to Australia and was probably, I guess the mindset that the Swedes were in was probably 10 years ahead of what was going on in Australia. And so from a young age, I was doing like master planning on big projects, like, $2 billion master plans as like a kid in a suit, kind of writing reports and punching out all these numbers and working on these huge projects. And I very quickly learned that it's totally technically possible and financially viable to make these big projects have no environmental impact. You can kind of do things that are powered 100% by renewable energy. You can basically, make these big projects water neutral. You can make them zero waste, and you can also, do so much great stuff with materials. But I found that that's not like the technology and the finance is kind of the easy part. And it's like on every project, I would just find we would put the solution forwards and it wouldn't necessarily kind of happen. Basically, it's like standard procedure. Everyone's excited on these new projects, master plans, and kind of like concepts that you see on blogs and stuff of all these cool things that we're going to do. But at the end, they often get ripped out because of sort of cost plans and things like this. And so, in effect, I lived in Sydney working on master plans for like, and buildings, like I work on detailed building design as well. And then I did that for about 3 years, moved to, when I was in Sydney, we were doing like a Jean Nouvel, Norman Foster master plan. I moved to London and did like lots of competition work. And I just got fed up with the kind of internal barriers of companies. I found it like basically I was fighting my bosses to do good things rather than like kind of sort of external barriers. And by the way, if the internet gets bad at any point, just someone jump in and let me know. I'm hoping the connection's fine. It is it?
Yes.
Ah, cool. Okay. So then basically, I found I would just like end up being this kind of like, I was very hardworking, but I was like always butting heads with all the bosses because they were just like coming up with silly reasons why we weren't doing these awesome things on projects. And it was usually kind of these silly cultural barriers that I found along the way. So one thing led to the next, and I quit my job. I bought a video camera and I jumped on a cargo ship and I moved to Mexico, and I started to basically cruise around sort of organizing events, doing talks, making films, doing animations, doing lots of like unusual creative projects to try and connect with people and engage with them in sort of environmental solutions in ways that I thought my friends would engage with. And I guess what I found was that I learned a lot through this. Like I ended up kind of starting to work with a hotel company that was a creative agency called Design Hotels. And I learned a lot of the kind of softer sort of more, less technical financial and more kind of like creative cultural aspects of these topics. And I found quite often they were more powerful, but less formulaic, it was difficult to kind of put your finger on why they worked in it. So there was a lot of experimentation from my side. And so what I'll show you, I'll start sharing a few slides now, but so basically, can you see the slides? Full screen, all good?
Yep.
Changing? Cool. So
I don't think they changed for me. I don't know if
is that no change?
no.
No.
No change. No, that's fine. I'll share the whole screen then. I think that's usually the problem. So where are we? Desktop. How is that changing?
Yeah, changing, yeah.
Okay, cool. So in effect, this became my obsession, is like transforming our cities from consumers to producers. And I mean, this was basically all the different projects that I kind of worked on over the years, and from sort of like 2007 working on projects to now, like a lot more is happening, and there's like a lot more sort of, you know, really ambitious projects popping up. But I still found it limiting working on these projects that were like, you know, everyone just, it's almost like someone comes up with a brief for a project and then we all have to like respond to that brief. And then it's like an office building that we need to make sure that it's not creating too much damage. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, we quite often think that these new buildings in cities are going to, because they're environmental, they're going to solve all our problems. But, you know, like the other side of it is like, even if countries do come to a point of agreeing and saying, yeah, we need to, you know, get off carbon, there's quite often no strategy on how to actually implement that. There's no kind of like, well, how do you do that? How do you get a city out off gas? How do you improve the efficiency of all the buildings? How are we actually going to do those things? Is there a sort of plan and a strategy in place? And so, you know, like, and that's talking about everything but new buildings. So this was a big, like, kind of learning experience for me, was this festival that we would organize off the grid. And I spent a lot of time working on this over the years, and it was like our little stunt to do things our way. It was kind of like on every project we were advising architects and developers, and it was always kind of like take it or leave it, you know, but we could recommend anything and they may or may not want to do it. But when this became our little project where we could do it our way. So what we would do is we would rock up to a sort of site, we would build a solar system, we would throw a party with the tunes, and we would basically tell people that music sounds better when it comes from the sun. And this evolved into something that we would then basically like we made it a zero waste festival in time, and then we started to bring in the Institute of Architects, and we made it a conference as well. And it was weird because I'd worked on, you know, looking back, I'd worked on so many incredible projects around the world, but like most of them no one really cared about. But this party people loved. They really, like, just everyone I meet always wants to talk to me about these parties, and they love this like simple idea of music sounding better when it comes from the sun. And I was almost like frustrated by that at times, and wondering like, why is this thing that's so simple like so exciting for everyone when all these cool, exciting, complex things are much more interesting? And I think that was it. It was simple, and it was like, and even more importantly, it was cultural. And so at some point in time, we worked out, and this is just a theory at the moment, but it's starting to kind of come into practice, is we kind of realized that this project was not about music and solar, it was about culture and technology. And so basically, what I'm going to take you through today is like our approach that we're taking to try and transform Greater Melbourne into the world's first self-sufficient city, not through basically purely coming up with a strategy, not the like, you know, why do you want to do something like this? You know, like, you know, why would we want to sort of, you know, go zero carbon globally? Why would we want to do any of these things? It's like, I think if we're talking about those things, then, you know, like, I'm bored already. It's like, I think the why we don't need to discuss anymore. I think we're past the why, and I think we need to move on to the what. And even the what in cities is like, you could pretty much sit 10 experts in a room and they could probably agree what needs to happen to get our cities to become self-sufficient. So it's not like you need to necessarily have the entire population of the city behind that. But so that's just the technical financial strategy. But the how is something that I think is really, really intriguing, because actually it's all of our city. It's not just, you know, these 10 people or, you know, these politicians. It's like everyone is part of the city. And so, you know, one way of defining culture is the sum total of ways of living passed down from one generation to the next. So you look at Melbourne, Melbourne's got 5 million people in it. And it's like, they all matter and their voice all counts. And they all define what culture is. No, there's no one person that says this is culture or this isn't culture. It's like, culture is it's like the dictionary, you know. It's like it evolves in time, and it's like if people start using a new word, it's in the dictionary. It's not the Queen's English. It's you know, it's what the language that people use. And so I think I mentioned this earlier, why cities, but yeah, I mean, basically it became very clear to us that like the national scale isn't working. In Australia, we have like, you know, we've got a country, then we have states and territories, and then we have local councils. And so it's interesting because like in Melbourne, there's no one's really in charge of the strategy for the city. You've got we've got 31 local councils in Melbourne, and not one of them, all of them have ambitious environmental targets mainly, but none of them really have the ability to sort of, or the, you know, the means to actually implement them. They're just kind of like guidelines and recommendations and trying to convince developers to not do too much damage. But they don't really have a way of actually facilitating mad, radical, ambitious change. And so then you like this scale of a state in Australia is so big that it's almost too big. It's kind of beyond what people can touch and feel. And so we found this balance of cities is really important. It's like you can't visualize a zero carbon country or a self-sufficient country, really. Like, it's so big and complex that it's hard, but you can actually kind of, I think humans can actually kind of get to the idea of going like, yeah, our city generates its own energy. Our city, you know, like has an unlimited supply of water. Our city sends no waste to landfill. And there's a locality to that people can get their head around. And I think this is a huge thing that's been missed, is just, it's always been spoken of as the things we need to do or the problems that we have. But, you know, how we do them, I think, is just particularly of interest. All right, I'm going to fill you in on this thing. Do you guys have any questions while I've been doing some random ranting, or shall I just continue? Go for it.
Carry on. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. So funny enough, we called this thing a new normal 2 years ago. So COVID hijacked our name because everyone's talking about a new normal now, but we called it a new normal for a different reason. We actually didn't want to radicalize the transformation. because I think quite often future visions for cities is often visionary and kind of radical and somewhat, it seems impossible. Our approach with this is, how do we take things that are like actually, like basically the construction industry doesn't really like innovation. Like people like talking about innovation, but structural engineers are conservative. They want to make sure that the building is definitely going to stand up as they should. Mechanical engineers want to make sure that the air conditioning systems are definitely going to work, and ventilation systems, of course, as they should for people's health. And it's like, from every kind of component of a building, it's quite often each component is not necessarily innovative at all, or rarely is, but it can be. And it's more like, it can be the sum total of products can be really innovative through the sum of the parts, rather than and that's basically piecing together quite boring things. And it's like a city. So what we did was we decided to look around the world at things that are currently happening, rather than talk about impossible things that have never been done before. We wanted to do an international review of solutions that are happening around the world, and ask the question, what if we did all of these things in Melbourne? And how could we normalize that? How could we make it not radical and impossible, but I quite often say, fuck sustainability and fuck innovation. Like, we need a new baseline. It's normal to have a city that has no negative impact. It's that's the base case. It's normal to have a city and a building that has a positive impact. That needs to be normal, not innovative, not sustainable. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, weirdly, we just called this thing a new normal, and now it has a slightly different meaning, but we're going with it. So what we did, so we've been working on this thing for 2 years pro bono. We basically I'd been knocking on the door of the City of Melbourne for a long time, trying to see if they would give us cash to do a strategy to transform the whole city. And I just felt like it was the right thing to do. And we could never really convince anyone to give us money for it. So after a while, we were just like, let's just do it. Let's, what are we waiting for? Let's just wait. Who says we need to be paid to do this thing? Let's just do it. So it started as a talk, and then I got asked to do a TED talk on it in Hamburg, and then it kind of slowly evolved into a report, and then it's kind of sort of just happening. It's kind of just it's a monster that's kind of had a life of its own, and it's starting to move. And part of the interesting approach that we took was not just targeting City of Melbourne. So I don't know if you can see my cursor, maybe if I like this. That's City of Melbourne in the middle there. Can you guys see my cursor? But just close to where the red arrow is really basically the City of Melbourne. It's quite small in the middle of Greater Melbourne. Greater Melbourne is that whole pink thing. So that's the 31 councils combined that make up what Melbourne is. And when you look at it, we spent a long time trying to work out what it consumes. Because, it's like, in some ways we're looking at it as a machine. It's like, what are its inputs? What are its outputs? Just, independent of humans for a second here. What are we talking about here? So Melbourne's tallest building is called Eureka Tower. It's about 300 meters tall. We put it into measures of how many times you could fill Eureka Tower to make the city work. So you can fill it basically with oil 40 times every year for transport. You can fill it with natural gas every year just to heat water, basically, 30 times every year. You can fill it with waste 50 times every year. 50 times filled with that thing is waste to landfill. And 9 of those 50 is organic waste. Food waste. You could fill it with coal, brown coal, like some of the dirtiest coal in the world, 95 times every year. And to provide water to Melbourne, you fill it 1,000 times every year. So it's basically like, Melbourne's also the second most livable city in the world, and just outside the top 20 in terms of the wealthiest cities in the world. I think it's like 21 or 22 wealthiest city in the world. And it's just outside the top 1% in terms of polluters. So it's basically a high consuming, luxurious, expensive machine that's leaving a mess behind for future generations. And so our attitude is that every city in the world needs to transform to become self-sufficient. That's how we will sort of transition globally, to get off coal, to have a future water supply. I don't know if you guys know, but like, we're globally in as big a water problem as we are as a carbon problem. It's like, I think about by 2030, 50% of the world's population will be in high water stress. So it's like, we're rapidly running out of water. And obviously we're like, doing some crazy things with waste. Only 2% of all plastics that are produced globally are in a closed loop cycle. So it's like, the other 98% are going somewhere linear. So this was the problem, but that's not to get down about it. It was just like, but it was a good starting point for us to know that, because actually we looked everywhere and we couldn't find it. Like we had to find this information from all over the place. And the other thing that was interesting is, you would think that the city had a plan. You know what I mean? You would think that there's a strategy on how to get there. So globally, there's general consensus is that we need to get to zero carbon globally by 2050. Most climate scientists would say that's too late. So, but that's kind of like, and that's an ambitious target at the moment. And so our attitude was, if we want to get globally to that or faster, then we need an example globally to demonstrate how to do that. And we need to do it soon. So we've said 2030, let's get there. And I'll show you how we're trying to do it. So this was also interesting, just trying to understand actually how the city works. So you got City of Melbourne there, all these councils, and then it's like, where does the water come from? Where does the sewer go? Where does the power come from? Like, where does the waste go? Where does the gas come from? Where does the oil come from? These are all things that we kind of hide from. We cover them on the roads. We put them in the basements of our buildings. They're hidden. And so this was an interesting exercise in itself, just going like, yeah, right, okay, that's basically where all these things are that help facilitate the city. And it was really interesting, like, for example, going to see the 3 coal-fired power plants that power the city, like, it made the solution so much more tangible when you looked at the problem. It's like, oh, we just need to replace those things. Like, that's it. So what we did was we did this international review, and we came up with 10 initiatives required to transform our cities. They're all profitable in their own right. They all pay for themselves within 10 years. And as I sort of mentioned earlier, the exciting thing is they're not, the first 9 have nothing to do with new buildings. And I think, like, personally, we're trying to work on more and more existing projects and retaining projects and trying to do retrofits than trying to do new competitions, because like, they're fun, but we've got like, so much of the existing city we need to fix up first. So, and this was basically came from doing this kind of international review, trying to get our head around, where are these things currently happening now? And, as I sort of mentioned earlier, this was going like, look, if these things are already happening, they're already cost effective, then we can innovate through simplicity, not through, like, quite often on this topic, people want to talk about an article in a blog that they heard about with this new solar cell that might be able to do this thing, or there's this new gadget that might do this thing. And it's, for some reason, humans are like drawn to this like exciting new technology. But I think that's boring, actually. It's like, I'm more excited by the stuff that we can deploy now, you know, rather than stuff that we can do in 5 and 10 years time. And it's like, the reality is we have all the technology we require already, and it's already commercially available. It's already financially viable. So we have it there. It's about deploying it. This is the challenge. How do you do it? So we basically came up with this thing where we're like, all right, so, you know, and this will take me a while to go through, so I might just skip over it. But basically it's like, you know, we took a step-by-step approach of saying, if we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this, what would happen? And so this is kind of looking at the infographics in terms of where energy comes from currently and where it's going to come from in 2030. This is looking at where water currently comes from and where it's going to come from in 2030 to create, you know, a water neutral city. The crazy thing about water in Melbourne is that you've got 10 times more water hits Melbourne every year than we consume. And most of that just hits hard surfaces, which are covered in bitumen that collect chemicals from cars. And they go into our waterways, so we can't swim in them, you know. And it's like, it's a dumb system. Our infrastructure is dumb at the moment. It's like, and this is the thing, it's like, we can kind of really, like, with some smart tweaks, we can basically just sort this thing out. It's not like the economy and the environment are two different things. It's just like, there's a win-win-win situation here. And this is an infographic explaining where waste currently goes and where it will go in 2030 in Melbourne. So we're sort of just like trying to pull things apart and simplify. And so the interesting thing that we found was basically that it's, we worked out what it would cost. Like, we worked out what it would cost and how long it would take to pay for itself as a kind of exercise. And we're like, it's $100 billion transformation. It will pay for itself in 10 years. And then when COVID hit, we realized we should look into the jobs because we need economic recovery. And so we found that it's creates 81,000 jobs in construction annually up to 2030 to build this thing. And it would provide 43,000 jobs ongoing from there, which in Melbourne, I think it's probably about 200,000 people lost their jobs in COVID last time I checked. So that was basically, you know, what, 40% of solving the economic recovery, basically. And the other thing that was interesting is you look at infrastructure projects that governments spend money on around the world, most of them don't pay for themselves. You know what I mean? You compare this to, you know, building mad highways and bridges and all kinds of things. And, you know, like there's all kinds of infrastructure projects that have no return at all. So the idea that this pays for itself is just like, you know, it seems very logical. And there was something else I was going to say, but oh yeah. It's also interesting to compare this kind of stuff to defense budgets. You look at how much money like countries spend on defense, and yeah, like you look at somewhere like Costa Rica, who basically just scrapped their defense budget and started blowing it on the environment. It's like, it's pretty exciting what you can do with that kind of money. So this was something that we theorized on, of going like, and in some ways, this whole thing started from a workshop, is that I got asked by the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne to our kind of like best art gallery to organize a workshop. Well, they asked me to do a talk and I thought the talk would be boring. So I tried to do a workshop and then it actually got cancelled for COVID. But this was why we kind of wrote this report, was for that workshop. And the idea was to get key stakeholders in a room together and ask the question, why not? Why not do this thing? It just makes sense for us all. So where we're at now is we skipped the kind of virtual reality, augmented reality step, and we went straight into prototyping. And I'll show you what we're doing with that at the end. But basically our goal is to build, we've translated the strategy into 15 projects, 15 tangible, real things with 15 of Melbourne's best architects. And we are trying to find sites and funds to build these 15 projects as examples to unlock the $100 billion transformation, and then basically deliver this thing. So we don't want to just release it. The intention was never to release it as a report and a vision and say, can someone do this? We're just treating it like, well, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? So let's just make it move. So we started with no money, and we've started with no sites, and we're slowly building things from there, basically. So what's probably interesting is if I just fly you through maybe these key pages as we go, and then I'll take you through the projects. So in effect, we need to electrify the entire transport system, get if you want to go zero carbon, you can't have cars that run on oil. So let's start there. So basically we need to halve the number of cars in Melbourne by 2030, which means we've got 1.3 million cars left, and we need to convert them to electric. So there's a guy in Melbourne who's doing this currently, John. And we also worked out that the health benefits of doing this would save about 600 million each year, potentially more than that. So I think it costs Melbourne something between 600 million and 1.4 billion every year in healthcare costs just from air pollution from cars. So already that's a saving, plus the fuel savings was about 1.4 billion. And it created all these jobs. So we've been looking at it on this macro scale of like, what if you do these things, big picture, and then how do we translate them into something that we can get started with? So we sort of, and I'll fly through this generally because I think there's just too much info to go through, but this is basically what's going on with like electric cars, electric buses, electric car conversion, banning cars, things like this. Like we're just working from case studies. This is not anyone's big idea. This is just a review. This is like, there's no future trend forecasting going on here. This is just saying what's happening in other places and let's do this here. So basically costed it, worked out the savings, pays for itself in 9 years to convert every single car to electric. And so Grimshaw, together with another firm, Greenshirt Consulting and Greenaway Architects, are working together with us to basically create an electric car conversion station as a kind of showcase in Melbourne. So we're trying to negotiate with government, private sector, and basically trying to find a site and funds to build this space, which is basically taking it's an existing structure and basically just, pretty much chucking some solar panels on it. And in effect, the approach was to each of the projects we're trying to have a cultural connection. So they're not just a piece of tech in their own right, but the two components here were, how do we make this accessible for everyone rather than just progressive people that might want to have an electric car? How do you make it exciting for tradies? How do you make it exciting for people, just a wide range of people that actually really need cars to work and to live? And rather than making this just some niche environmental thing that kind of only appeals to people that have that sort of sensibility. And it's like, I often joke around about it, although I look like a bit of a hippie. Like I think in some ways hippies kind of killed the environmental movement because they gave it a style and a kind of it made it that if you didn't feel like you were a hippie, you're excluded. And I think that really the environment's for all of us, and it's so important that it's inclusive for everyone. And so we go through these projects, this is not to say we've nailed the cultural connection on all of them. I think that you can always improve these things, but we see them as a great starting point of how to connect people with these kinds of initiatives. The next one was basically Foolscap, who are Melbourne's best hospitality designers. They've basically taken on the challenge of our trains between cities run on diesel. So basically, she is Adele from Foolscap, has basically taken on the train and said, let's make the experience between our cities awesome. I think there's a second one. So let's make it fun. Like, let's make it the best way to travel between our cities. It's so awesome to catch the train in Australia in terms of the sort of experience between the two places, but the architectural, the fit out, the hospitality experience in the train sucks. It's like, it's not great. And so this was saying, look, let's do something. Let's get this moving by creating more demand for trains, by basically doing the fit outs of our trains. And Melbourne has like world-class hospitality. And so it's just like, let's just chuck that hospitality on the train and enable people to enjoy the ride between. The interesting thing is, once we get all these cars onto electric, we actually have a huge amount of energy storage distributed across the city. So the cars basically become a distributed battery bank. And so an architecture firm called Hassel took on the challenge of basically turning existing car parks into cultural battery banks. So basically, the objective is it's called vehicle to grid charging. So you basically can charge and discharge your car. So in the not too distant future, people will start to basically Airbnb out their car. You can basically rent your car to the grid. It'll use it for storage and sort of like, draw from it when it needs. And that will basically offset the cost of charging. So you can kind of do it for free. But the real challenge here was, how do we make these spaces exciting so they're not just an inert battery bank? And so these guys are working on a number of sort of performing arts centres and different cultural projects. So their proposition is to make basically our these multi-story car parks that are inert and boring really culturally thriving through arts and performance. This one is for me, one of the most exciting propositions and one of the most simple ones. And this is the thing, I'll keep coming back to it, but it's boring. And that's exciting. It's like, basically we need to get our cities off gas. Gas is a fossil fuel, and we need to get, like, we've got all this gas infrastructure in our cities, and we're building new buildings that are reliant on gas, which is crazy. So we worked out that something like, it's about 90% of Melbourne's homes have a gas connection. So we've got it down to a point of like having an idea of how many heaters, gas stoves and gas ovens there are across the entire city. And then how do we get all of these places to be 100% electric? So, and this is happening around the world. This is a kind of an idea of where basically we need to, convert our gas system where the gas is currently required and where we need to electrify. And then basically this is what Claire Cousins has proposed, which is basically one of the more challenging building types, is a multi-story apartment building. And the actual before shot of this, I should have actually put the before and afters in, which is kind of fun to look at, but you'll be able to see it on some of our videos. Basically, the before shot is a 5-story car park as street frontage. Now, when you think about that in terms of the city and the experience, it sucks. It's an eyesore. It's boring to look at. And it's like no one wants to hang out in this part of the city during the daytime because it's just like it lacks atmosphere, and it's just a space to house cars for people to drive around in. So in effect, part of the kind of reduction in cars in the city enables some additional space to allow people to, take back some of this space. And so what Claire's proposed here is a really smart proposition, is basically giving a commercial model to electrifying these buildings by basically allowing every cultural connection. We've tried to find a way to motivate the people that might be the barrier into being excited by this. So you look at the residents. Currently, the residents would have to pay for getting their building off gas. And, there's probably not a huge motivation. There is a saving. It does pay for itself, but it's hard work. And to get probably, 100 people in an apartment building to all agree to that is quite complex. So the proposition here is to basically create this sort of tenancy type model to allow basically people to, like a commercial developer to come in, provide community spaces that can be basically leased out, and then at the same time electrify the building. So I guess, how are we going for time? I probably should try and plow through this. Hey, going a bit slow. I'll just kind of skip through, and I think you probably get the general gist of it, but efficient architecture, we basically need to retrofit every single building in the city, not just like, one or two. We need to introduce mandatory retrofits, make it law to do everything that's financially viable in terms of energy efficiency in all buildings. This is becoming law around the world. New York City, there's LA, and they're both pushing. They've actually brought in mandatory retrofits for different scales of buildings, and you've got organizations in the Netherlands that are actually doing this for people at no cost, and then they're paying it back in their savings. So this was what Fender Katzelides proposed, which is basically it's an old brick university building that is very leaky and inefficient, and they've basically wrapped it in a blanket, and it's a passive house retrofit. So I mean, basically this one, we're kind of building this up on the rooftop right now, which is pretty cool. So what's interesting is that currently only just the city of Melbourne only uses about 1% of its solar potential. So there's you could have 100 times more solar just in the city. The other thing that's interesting is we could power about 40% of Melbourne with just 1% of the area of the city, which is pretty amazing. So basically, and that's that equivalent area is basically installing solar on every second rooftop. So this is a proposition about basically doing that. So John Wardle Architects have basically proposed a solar rooftop that is not just a little solar system in the corner that is out of the way of the lift well and or the lift overrun and the air conditioning systems, but giant solar systems that cover our entire roofs, that create new spaces. Melbourne has a rooftop culture, and this is kind of embracing that and pushing it further. Solar and wind grid scale. So how do we get people interested in renewable power plants rather than, the biggest barrier in building wind farms and even solar projects is community opposition. More so wind farms than solar projects, but it's, so to have the community supportive of these things is extremely important. And so this is what HA have proposed for transforming Latrobe Valley into an agriculture renewable energy hub. And so we're basically trying to not just make these projects inert in themselves, but actually there's a dual use of land that you can have with solar and wind projects. Solar, you can grow food and produce. And the proposition here is to basically create this hospitality hub in the region where people really want to go and hang out there, not just get their power from there and have nothing to do with it. So it's, it's a tourism strategy, it's a hospitality strategy, it's creating an entirely new destination by providing energy to the city. And the other synergy here is basically wind combined with forestry. There's a lot of wood that we're going to need to grow for zero carbon buildings. And so by basically introducing new forestry and actually just growing new trees that doesn't need to be forested, turning farmland into forest basically that can also generate energy is the proposition here. Water unlimited is a big one. Basically, it's actually illegal in Melbourne to drink treated sewer water. And whereas in London, I think water goes through 5 people before they drink it. In Amsterdam, I think the water's been from from the Swiss Alps through 10 different people before you drink the water in Amsterdam. And the funny thing is that all water is recycled and has been recycled for millions of years. So this project is 2 parts. One, it's basically about creating a nightclub that targets young crew, progressive young people that go, we support this. We know the water's just as clean. And it's got a rebellious atmosphere to it that it has basically, misting and, different uses of perfectly good water that just once was dirty water, basically. And so this is a kind of cultural sort of stunt to make, to basically engage people in treated water. And then this is also a really exciting proposition, which is turning suburban streets, which are covered in basically bitumen, and turning them into, this is a way of dealing with stormwater management, but also creating density in suburbs. So this is by NMBW. This was by Open Work. So and these guys are like the greatest designers. Like, you have to check out all of their work. Waste to energy this is Wowowa. So basically the proposition here is to take food waste to the local pool for free entry. And basically this is an anaerobic digester taking food waste and generating heat and power from it. So 150 of these across the city will deal with all of Melbourne's food waste. And so we're actually, I went out to see one of these just the other day. We're kind of doing feasibility studies on these projects at the moment, and getting close to having a home and some funds for this one. This is another waste to energy project at the Queen Victoria Market, so the main markets, food markets, combined with a cinema by 6 degrees. And then we need to end landfill. So basically, this one's more challenging. It's kind of like not a new thing, but it's taking away. It's the absence of something. And so it's the one project that we've said, well, we just need to change law. And so this is basically a gallery, a retrospective art gallery, looking back at what waste once was. Identifying all the things currently that we need to ban from going to landfill and change regulation. So that's by Dreamer. And then this is Addition Office, which the other side of going zero waste as a city is that we need a space to encourage circularity of businesses. And also this place is like a mad material library. So the proposition here is basically to create a space where you can go and fix anything, fix and repair anything. There's electronics repair, there's bike repair, there's clothing repair. It's basically a center of shared repair and circularity. And then the last 2 propositions around new architecture. So basically buildings that generate more energy than they consume, export more water than they consume, and suck in more waste than they produce. New codes are coming on around the world to enforce this. California, Vancouver, Toronto, and more, actually. So basically, this is what Kennedy Nolan have proposed as a zero carbon, water neutral, zero waste building down at a site at the Docklands, which is actually a hotel, Hotel Optimismo. And that the purpose of that is to make it a space that people can go, touch, feel, experience, so they can actually, it makes it tangible for everyone. And it's not as a cost premium, but it's a, you know, it's an on budget project. Fieldwork's proposition was around building without carbon and without waste. So basically it's about the construction process. And then I'll just wrap up by showing you what we're going to do at Design Week. So this is what we're launching. This is the building I'm sitting in right now, and we're taking over the rooftop and building all 15 prototypes in different spaces across the roof. We got a grant from the City of Melbourne to do this, and we're working with artists in different spaces to basically activate the whole thing. So I might stop talking there and open it up for questions and discussion if you like.
Thank you, Ross. That was a great project and everything, and it gives me a little bit of hope for the future as well. Yeah, so if you guys have any question, comment, or whatever, feel free to ask. There's no problem at all. Maybe I'll start, Ross, because I'm wondering a little bit about, it's a very cool project, but at the same time, you said that Melbourne is like, you would like to set an example, you said, for other cities in the world, right? And
well, I think a city needs to create an example, whether we want to set it, but we are doing what we can to, I see it more like we're just doing everything we can to accelerate the transition rather than that we are the example, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Because you also said that Melbourne is one of the richest cities in the world, and most of the cities that are trying to do something are actually quite wealthy in a way. So I'm wondering if it's feasible also for cities that are poorer from, for example, the southern part of the world, how could they pursue something like that or something similar and become zero neutral before 2050 or 2030?
I actually think there's a bigger opportunity, to be honest, because you look at how Africa just skipped the whole infrastructural telecommunications thing and went straight to mobiles. It's like basically it's the same deal with the whole energy, water, and waste system. It's like I used to live in Mexico for a few years. I've basically you look at a lot of Latin American cities. They're undergoing a huge development, and it's like as these cities basically are expanding, building new roads, new highways, new infrastructure. It's like, you know, there's even some of the wealthy cities are not going to be expanding as much, and you know that in some ways I think that it's important that they lead, but also and create an example. But I think also the cities that are changing the fastest are the ones that have the biggest opportunities. The poorest cities that are not growing are probably the biggest challenges. But saying that, that you just got to look at what the alternative is. It's like, you know, you just look at coal's dying, it doesn't stack up anymore. You know, like oil's dying, it doesn't stack up anymore. These things all just make sense in their own right. And so I don't think it takes a wealthy city to do it. I think it takes a wealthy city to lead. But I don't think, I think once a wealthy city has actually sort of taken the step, the other cities, it makes it easy for everyone else to follow.
From what I understand, everything you're trying to do is already happening in individual cities, just not everything together. And what you're trying to do is just combine everything in one city and just set that example, as in we can do everything, not just one thing.
Pretty much, yeah.
That wasn't actually my question. I just wanted to comment on that. I actually do have a question. I wanted to ask, do you think that trying to design ecologically on an individual scale might eventually pay off Or is the need for change too great to wait for that to happen?
What do you mean, like to build on an ecological scale? Is that what you said?
Design ecologically on an individual scale, like individual buildings.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yeah, I don't mean to say that's not important. I think that's 100% important. Every new building is an incredible opportunity to like, you know, give back to the city. And I just think that quite often what we do is we build bad buildings, we make them 10% better than the worst they can be, and then we celebrate how sustainable they are. Do you know what I mean? It's like our building is a little bit more efficient than the baddest building in the city. Or our building has like a little bit more solar energy, or our building has a little bit better materials than the worst. And like, still I find internationally 10% better is something that people are happy with. And it's like, it's still 90% bad. And so to me, we definitely, like, new buildings will happen, new construction will happen. It needs to happen. I mean, you know, it's inevitable. And basically we need to set a new benchmark for that by ensuring that it has no damage at all. So like, I think 100% support that everything needs to be really high performing and low environmental impact. I guess I just mean it in the sense that let's not settle for a little bit better. We need to raise the benchmark, and the baseline needs to be like that there is no damage, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like concrete. Concrete is the if concrete was a country, it would be the third highest emitter in the world after China and the States. And so we still kind of build all these buildings with concrete. And it's kind of like, you know, at what point in time are we going to stop? You know what I mean? It's kind of like, you know, do we continue to go there and just pillage, or do we make a call? Like, my attitude is, if you can't build a building that has no negative environmental impact or a positive impact, then you shouldn't be allowed to build it. Because we have the tools today to build buildings that are profitable, that don't have a negative impact.
Thanks for that. Sorry, I don't. Do you want to say something, or will I read some questions?
Okay, yeah. Can I ask you first, like, something quite maybe stupid, Ross, but are you positive that you're going to achieve this by 2030 at the City of Melbourne? Do you think it's possible?
I explain it to people as the fact that we're relentlessly optimistic. We are talking about it as we're doing it, if you know what I mean. And I think that we have to have that attitude, because I presented this to state government and they said, that's great. Like, that we think this is great. The targets are very ambitious, maybe too much for us. They are too much for us, basically. We'll probably never be able to commit to something like that. But if you can work with the private sector to deliver those projects, it might make it easier for us to commit to something like that. And so I mean, I guess, look, everything's impossible until you've done it. And can I confirm that we're definitely going to do this? Well, I mean, definitely not. I could, like, there's no guarantees in life at all. I can't even guarantee what I'm going to have for lunch today. But we are on a mission to try and find a site and funds for all 15 projects by the end of this year. And we're all very positive and optimistic that we're going to do that. And I think that that it's about kind of managing the risk. if you know what I mean. I think that I guess I just find that generally when people come out with visions, master plans and strategies, it's usually top down and that's it. And we're basically trying to hit it with a top down approach and a bottom up approach at the same time. And the reality is we have no idea what we're doing. Like the reality is that like we can't say like we've totally got this. It's like no one's ever done this before. Do you know what I mean? And like I'm in touch with people all over the world, and everyone's like puzzled about how to do it themselves. You know what I mean? It's like all you can do is reference other cities of what they're doing. It's like Copenhagen is targeting zero carbon by 2025, and they're and I think that you've got to learn from other cities and see what they're doing, but to do anything that's never been done before is going to require some learning along the way and some failure along the way. And yeah, so I think to be realistic, no idea if we can pull this off, but we're having a crack. Do you know what I mean? We're trying our best, and it's like, I don't know. So far, things have been happening beyond our expectations, if you know what I mean. I feel like we've been getting a lot of support from a lot of people, and I feel like it's escalating and accelerating beyond what any of us really expected at first. And so I hope it works out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that I think it's good to have sort of a positive perspective on the issue, because I think most of the times when people talk about sustainability and everything, it comes from a very kind of negative point of view, rightfully so. But I think that way it just gets a bit overwhelming, and perhaps it's better to kind of try to find a solution like you have done. We have a couple of questions coming in the chat and on the Padlet link, which I can read. First of all, there's a more sort of practical question coming from Gordon saying, very inspiring. It suddenly seems achievable instead of worrying about the size of the problem. How do you have the numbers of cars in the city?
Good question. Well, to start with, the number of 50% we made up, okay? And I find that sometimes it's kind of, I've got a lot of friends in like City of Melbourne, state government, things like this, and it's funny because sometimes we can get too caught up in the details to forget what we're trying to actually do. And the thing is that I guess there's two sides to it. One is that, is it achievable? When you compare different cities around the world, that would take Melbourne to below something like Berlin, for example. And right now that seems impossible to do in the next 10 years. But the other side of it is that I don't think it's so simply about saying half the people can't have a car anymore and half the people have to sell their car. The reality is that as car sharing comes in, as sort of, there's so much different mobility that is coming forwards, moving forwards, and it's just kind of like, so many of my friends are basically, if they have a car, they basically sharing it out anyway to help them pay for it. There's there's so many people that live in places that never use a car that don't need it. And it's kind of, it's not so brutal about saying don't have a car, but there is a balance of saying kind of like, do we need to have this many cars? And, Melbourne is kind of almost like in some ways, Australian cities have kind of, American style master planning where they were designed around cars. And it's like without a doubt, there's a great opportunity for there to be a lot less cars. Whether we can really halve it, it's another question. But the intention behind that was each of the initiatives we're trying to do something real rather than just solve it with a Band-Aid. And I think just saying that we without a doubt 2.6 million cars for 5 million people, it's a bit excessive. And it's like, so, you know, and that's just about ownership, you know, and it's just kind of, it is changing. But I think if you actually, I think a lot of what we've been looking at as well is, you know, like when you ask, so the way we've sort of structured it is like private sector, public sector people. Okay. It's like, you know, you've got, I mean, yeah, the public sector is the government, you've got the private sector and all the businesses, and you've got the general public. And I think quite often when we talk about this, people ask, what can I do? How do I change something? What can I fix? And it's like, people say to you, recycle, ride a bike, you know, buy green power, eat less meat. You know, these are things that you can do as individual choices, but you still feel disempowered between what's the full problem and what you can actually do. And so I think that rarely has it been the case. And I haven't seen this before, where you kind of on a city scale, you've brought together, trying to bring together all three to actually allow for that. And so something like cars, it's like, it can't be as simple as like, oh, I should sell my car then. But it's like, well, to start with, what are the tariffs? Because it's not aligned. You've got a transport strategy. And the way that they're like right now, they're trying to charge electric cars because they're not paying, you know, fuel gets taxed, and they're trying to charge electric cars a tariff per kilometer to help pay for the road tax, when they should be motivating people to get electric cars. Do you know what I mean? And so it's kind of like, it's about sort of looking at it holistically. And that's where you go back to the health thing. And you go, hang on a sec, having all these cars on the road is killing us. Well, we could just say everyone has to convert their car to electric, but that would be more expensive than only converting half the cars. So basically, by making it easier to do it and kind of bringing people together on it, there's benefits. But is it fully solved? No. But in some ways we have, I think the other way of looking at it is that I don't feel like we are saying we have the solution, but I do feel like we have a solution. And I think that there's infinite pathways to get there. And, you know, but I think also if we spend another 10 years sitting around talking about which technical solution to get there, we'll do nothing. And so we've tried to sort of draw a line in the sand and say, well, this is good enough. Let's, you know, like, and I think that's, it's important, is that it's often debated, you know, like, oh yeah, should I do that now, or should I wait 2 years to get the new solar panels because, you know, maybe the new ones are coming out? And it's like, we've got to get off coal, you know, like it's got to happen. So anyway, I don't know if that.
Thank you for that. We have other comments on the chat thanking you for the lecture and for ending on sort of like a hopeful note. I think I'll read another few questions from the Padlet. One says, working with so many practices and people could be challenging. So how do you coordinate that to make sure that the project is moving forward?
It's a good question. They're all my friends. And this was a cool part of the story, actually, is that we spent like 2 years writing the report. And then I invited 15 architects over to my house for dinner. And I said, just poured my heart out and was like, here's what we're doing. We want your help. Like, do you want to help us? And this was just after the bushfires hit in Australia. And so they all were just like, yeah, we're in, let's do this. And we intentionally picked like progressive firms, conservative firms, big practices, small practices, because we wanted it to be a diverse mix. And it could definitely be more diverse, but it's a sort of cross-section of different firms across the city that just I know. And to be honest, like, it's a lot of work. It's like, I spend so much time on this thing, and coordinating them is like herding sheep. It's like, it's hard work. Yeah, it's like, basically I have to email everyone out a lot. I have to basically host meetings a lot. They're all coming here tomorrow morning, and it's not been easy. I've learned a lot from it, especially as an engineer. You're normally the consultant for architects, and architects usually leading the project. So it's been really eye-opening for me and time-consuming. But also what's been incredible is how awesome they've been. You know, these are all competitors. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I've actually got to let someone in downstairs. I might have to end on that note. They are all competitors, and they've all come together for something that's way bigger than themselves. And just be down in 2 secs. And it's like it's constantly been inspiring me to see how much these guys, like, it went that night from us having them over for dinner. It was a number of dinners, like 3 dinners over a couple of months. The first dinner, it went from being my project, our project at Finding Infinity, to this collective. It became our project, and they started to take ownership over their projects. And that's part of where this thing is going, is like, it's not just like, you know, it's not my idea and my vision or our project. It's like, it's a collective. And what we're doing at Design Week is organizing a launch and a number of talks, and we're trying to use that to widen the circle, not to try and convince everyone, but we're inviting 50 people each night to like a nice intimate setting, and we'll be live streaming those talks you guys might want to tune into. But the idea is to widen that circle to the next crew, to be like we need help. And it's like, really, we need the city to own the city, because no one's in charge. We are. So it's kind of like, you know, and I think that's really important. It's like, we're all citizens, you know, it's like, we are the city. And I think that rarely it's just that we don't feel like there's a way to do that. You know, there's no, and I think that, you know, to summarize, speaking to a group of architects, it's like, architecture is an incredible mechanism to facilitate this change. It's like, it's a platform to do that. If you are work at a bar, or you kind of you know, like you're an electrician, or I don't know, like, you know, there's like so many jobs in your life in the world that you don't, it's much harder. But as an architect, it's you know, your responsibility to fuck with every project as much as you possibly can to have a positive environmental impact. So I better run, because the builder's here downstairs and he needs to get in. He's waiting for me. So sorry guys, but feel free to email me some questions. I'm happy to get back to you. Do you mind if I go?
Okay, thank you, Ross. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you. It was a wonderful lecture.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. See ya.
Bye. Okay, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you especially A131 users, Suez and Reset for making this possible. And this was the last chapter. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. See you next time.